Welcome everyone to this webinar entitled Digital Humanities, New Approach to Research and Teaching for the Medieval Mediterranean. It is really wonderful to have all you here. I see colleagues, friends, so it's very interesting to have all you here. I'm sure that it is, yes, it is recording the webinar, okay. My name is Nerea Fernández Cadenas. I am the organizer of this webinar, together with my colleagues, Leticia Barrionova-Almozarra, who is in the session. Leti, I am going to put your video, okay? Okay, you have to accept the permission for the video, Leti.
Hi, sorry.
No problem.
Okay, please, again.
Okay, Leticia Barrionuevo is doing her PhD about academic library in digital humanities, and my other colleagues that helped me to organize this webinar is Pedro Mateo Pelitero, who is doing his PhD about archaeology, but unfortunately he can't stay today with us. This webinar is sponsored by the Society for the Medieval Mediterranean, and today we have the privilege to count with the presence of Dr. Antonella Liuzzo Scorpo, who is the co-president of the society. So Antonella, if you want to say some words to the attendees, I will be delighted. I want to make, okay. So Antonella.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you, Nerea, and the organizing committee for putting together such an interesting and certainly timely event dedicated to digital humanities and new approaches to research and teaching. An event that I have to say has become even more digital than we originally planned for, yet I think opening actually new possibilities and certainly favoring inclusion thanks to this new format. This event has been awarded the Simon Barton Prize 2020 by the Society for the Medieval Mediterranean, a prize that aims to assist postgraduate students and early career researchers with the organization of conferences, symposia, workshops, and outreach activities and public engagement that align with the aims and scope of the society. That, for those of you who might know it, is dedicated to the academic study of Mediterranean history and culture from the 5th to the 15th century. The society has also got a journal and a peer review, international peer review journal, Al-Masak, that is concerned with fostering innovative, cross-cultural and interdisciplinary research in the field. The Simon Barton Prize was established in 2017 by Professor Simon Barton himself, who was the former president of the Society for the Medieval Mediterranean. And for those of you who might have met Simon, he was actually a massive fan and supporter of early career scholar himself. This was one of his priorities, and that's why this grant is actually dedicated to his memory. Applications are currently open for the next round for the 2021 prize that closes on the 31st of January 2021. So please do check our website to find out more details about the deadline, the eligibility criteria, the equality, diversity and inclusivity policy, and so forth. Along with the Simon Barton Prize, the Society for the Medieval Mediterranean also organizes biannual international conferences with related travel grants for postgraduate students. We award biannual book and article prizes. And more recently, we have been organizing a webinar series in collaboration with the Wolf Institute at Cambridge. And there are more events to come. So again, do check our website or follow us on Twitter or Facebook for further updates. We'd like also to welcome new members, of course, to join the society, as this will offer everyone the opportunity not just to receive, obviously, the journal Al-Masak and to vote at the AGM of the society, but actually to become part of a growing and dynamic community of scholars at different stages of their careers from a range of disciplines whose research focuses on the medieval Mediterranean. And I'd like to conclude just with a personal reflection I think that we all agree that 2020 has been a challenging and in some aspects revolutionary year for many disciplines, impacting the ways in which scholars interact, share, and communicate their research. And there's been a sudden shift, I would say, to live and work progressively more online that has made all of us profoundly aware of the benefits, the opportunities, but also the limitations of researching and teaching within a fully digital context. I'm sure that this event, that was already planned, by the way, before all this happened and before the more recent developments, will be very useful and inspiring to reflect upon the role and I think the new meanings that digital humanities in general is actually taking for both our research and teaching practices. So enjoy the rest of this inspiring and stimulating event. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Nerea, and the organizing committee once again for doing this.
Okay. Well, Antonio, thank you very much for these kind words. I really, really appreciate it. And I would like to thank, of course, to all the society members for support, for the support you give to postgraduate students and early career scholars. It is very, very important for us. So thank you for all the society members. Sorry. So now I would like to make a quick introduction of how this webinar works before I introduce our distinguished panelists. As you know, this webinar is split into 2 sessions. This is the first session named Digital Research. This session will last 1 hour and a half, more or less. Then we will take a break of about 30 minutes. And after that, the second session, Digital Teaching, will start, okay? Regarding to the structure, each panelist will give a paper or a talk of about 15 minutes. And at the end, when all the panelists have finished attendees could ask some questions to them, okay? For about 10-15 minutes. You can type your question in the Q&A portal that you have at the bottom of the screen. If you could check it, it's at the bottom of the screen. So I encourage everyone to write their question in the Q&A portal. And before I forget, we are recording this webinar. So if you want to rewatch it, or to recommend to someone, it will be available in YouTube and in other platforms, but don't worry because we will inform you about this by email, okay, later. Okay, so are you ready? So let's start with our panelists. Okay, our speakers in this session, Digital Research, are 3 brilliant scholars who are doing the research using digital tools, okay? I will introduce them in order of appearance. So, okay, I am going to put the video of David. Okay, so we will start with Dr. David Natal Villazala. David is lecturer in history at Royal Holloway in London. His current project analyzes how a universal late antique church was constructed despite the end of the Western Roman Empire through GIS software. Okay, so hi David, thank you for staying here with us. And the next panelist is, okay, I'm going to put the next one, is Dr. Antonio Blanco González, who is lecturer at the University of Salamanca in Spain. He's focused on social and landscape archaeology using geographical information system in his research, okay? And last but not least, Evina Steinova, who is postdoctoral researcher at the Fugiamus ENG. She's dealing with the early medieval manuscripts of the Etymology of Isidore of Seville, its innovation and the intellectual networks that served as channels for the spreading of this innovation. Okay, so thank you everyone for accepting the invitation of stay here with us. So now we will start with our first speaker, David, who will give a paper about connecting clerics, social network analysis, and the construction of the late antique church. I hand over to you, David.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Well, thank you, Nerea, for the introduction, and thank you, the organizing committee, for putting together this webinar. My presentation today has two different sections. In the first section, I'm going to provide a very brief overview of the project I'm currently heading. And the second section is going to be again, a very brief overview of a case study, just to give you a flavor of the kind of research we are conducting. I'm going to share screens now. Is that working now?
I don't know.
I don't think it's working, my screen sharing. I think you need to do something there. Otherwise, I mean, it's not that it's incredibly important.
Now, I think, or I am sharing my screen.
You're sharing your screen now. Yeah.
Okay. So wait a moment.
Oh, so apparently you have disabled attendee screen sharing for everyone. Well, I can start my presentation without the PowerPoint. It's not super important. So if at some point, Nerea, you realize that you can do it, just let me know.
Okay.
And I will start sharing screen. So as I said, two sections. The first section is what the project is about. So this is one of these ERC projects running for 5 years. And we are at this moment, we are halfway through. So it's finishing at the end of 2022. And at the moment it comprises 9 members. But this is a moment of change. So some members joining, some members going out. But at the moment is 5 researchers, all of them based in the UK, 2 software developers based at the Austrian Academy of Sciences in Vienna, 1 dissemination and impact officer, and 1 intern. And the project, as I already said, is based at 2 different institutions, Royal Holloway, University of London, where most of us are based, and the Austrian Academy of Sciences, where the project was originally launched in January 2018. So the project, the title of the project is Connected Clerics, so slightly different to the title I provided for today's paper. Connected Clerics, Building a Universal Church in the Late Antique West, 380 to 604. And as the title suggests, this project looks at the construction of ecclesiastical institutions in the late Antique West, so precisely at the time when the Western Roman Empire was fragmenting into smaller polities. As you can imagine, this topic has received a huge amount of scholarly attention in the past. Up to the 1950s, most of this attention focused on the structure of offices and canon law. But after the 1950s, social history led historians away from the analysis of institutions and set the focus on individuals, ideas, and processes. And social history has fundamentally reframed our understanding of how these institutions work, primarily by kind of revealing the fallibility of institutions, and also by showing that ecclesiastical authority is socially constructed and is not depending only on the title. So,
David, sorry, you could share now the screen.
Okay, thanks. Is that working now?
Yeah.
There you go. So this is essentially what I was saying. So I don't know if I can do this. Yeah, there you go. So as I said, social history has shown the fallibility of institutions and how these authorities socially constructed. But by moving away from the analysis of institutions, there are 2 questions that have remained unanswered, and is how these ecclesiastical institutions emerged over the new political borders, and also how the transition from informal relationships to more formal structures of law and policymaking came about at this time. And similar processes have been studied in sociology and political sciences, particularly in the field of new institutional theory, which was developed primarily in the 1980s. And instead of looking at institutions and the structure of institutions, this perspective looks at the rules, beliefs, and conventions that support these institutions. So essentially, what are the laws, what are the narratives, and what are the patterns of behavior that maintain and support institutions. And one of the most demonstrably effective methods to analyze these rules, beliefs, and conventions is social network analysis, because it provides a more empirical understanding of the social relationships that articulate these organizations. So there's been some studies in contemporary history putting together these two approaches, but there's not been such a study in late antiquity. And that is what I wanted to do when I wrote this proposal. And following these approaches and methods, what we are trying to do in the Connect project is looking at how the structure of clerical relationships in late antiquity shape the way in which ecclesiastical laws, different clerical behaviors, and different visions of the church were disseminated in Western Europe primarily. So to put it in other words, so how the clerical relationships shaped the way the church was constructed, shaped the way people thought about the church, shaped the way people related to ecclesiastical law, and also shaped the way people behaved within the church, and to what extent these behaviors and rules and visions of the church supported or hindered the construction of ecclesiastical institutions. And following this approach, so it's, as you see, 4 different sections. Also, the team has 4 different strands. So the visual prosopography strand is looking at the networks in itself, so trying to analyze these episcopal networks. So in the visual prosopography strand, there are 2 software developers currently developing our network software, and 1 postdoctoral researcher who is looking at the connections in the letters of Augustine. There's the ecclesiastical law strand, so it comprises 1 PhD student, and she's working on councils in Northern Africa from 390 to 420. And this is a key moment in the definition of ecclesiastical law, because there's almost 1 council a year in North Africa. And what she's doing, well, she's doing 2 different things. She's a philologist, and she's looking at Mounier's edition of these councils. And she has the hypothesis that Mounier didn't pay a lot of attention to the subscriptions of these councils, so the list of attendees in these councils. So she's trying to figure out if these lists are correct according to the manuscript tradition. And then she's trying to find different alliances and different factions in these councils, and seeing how that shaped the ecclesiastical policy at this time in North Africa. The other strand is Connected Minds strand, and this is looking at different visions of the church, and it comprises 1 PhD student and 1 postdoctoral. The PhD student is Amal Shahata. She's originally from Alexandria, and she's the only person working on the Eastern Mediterranean. She's working on precisely Alexandria, because Alexandria at this time was this kind of factory of ideas. And we were interested in seeing how these ideas that emerge in a very local environment, which is Alexandria, how these ideas travel to the West and reframe ideas of the church also in the West. So she's looking at populist discourse in Alexandria in the 5th century and hate speech, and how that created different factions within Alexandria. And then there's also a postdoctoral researcher in this strand, Alice Hickling, and she's looking at Gregory the Great, the Pope Gregory the Great. So he died precisely in 604, which is the end of our project as well. And she's looking at how Gregory distributed different ideas about the church, how he constructed the idea that the church was a unified entity with him at the top of it, obviously, and how he distributed these in his letter collection. And then the ecclesiastical government strand is primarily focusing on patterns of clerical behavior. So to what extent different clerics in different areas, despite being under different rules, different laws, probably different also ethnic identities, but they behave similarly. So it comprises only 1 person, which is me, and I'm working on Leo the Great. So the Pope in the 5th century, one of the key figures of the construction of this idea of universal church. And I'm looking at his epistolary, primarily looking at how he had a number of addresses and how he distributed these patterns of behavior with his different addresses through his letters. As this is a digital humanities webinar, I suppose you are more interested on the digital aspects of this project. So this is the software that we are not developing from scratch. The software already existed. It was developed by researchers and software developers at the Austrian Academy of Sciences, primarily for archaeological research. What we did is using what they already had and transform it so it was more useful for us and also for other historical projects. This is the old interface. It looks much better now, but what it allows you to see connections among individuals, which didn't allow you to do previously. But this was primarily a GIS software because it was done by archaeologists for archaeologists. This is the old interface again, but what we have done is including new capabilities. So now you can visualize different connections and networks on the map. And it also will have a timeline so you can see how these different connections change over time. And finally, this is an open access database. So we are collecting the information on letter exchanges in late antiquity. At the moment, it comprises the letters, the whole collection of Augustine. This is Victoria Leonard, who is a postdoctoral researcher in the visual prosopography strand, and she has created all these entries for Augustine's letters, including his ghost letters, so letters to which Augustine referred to, but are not part of his epistolary. So all these letters are going to be in this open access database. Alice Hickling has also included the letters of Gregory the Great, and the plan is in the future to include also Ambrose of Milan and the letters of Leo the Great. And that is the end of the first section and kind of quite nicely links to the second section of this talk, which is going to be about Ambrose of Milan. This is a case study, a very brief overview of a case study, just to give you an idea of what we are doing. So Ambrose, well, this was part of my PhD 10 years ago. And if you think that I should be tired of the man 10 years after, well, you're right. I'm starting to be a bit tired of Ambrose, but he's kind of interesting because he was a very prolific writer. And because he was so prolific, he has completely skewed our understanding of the 4th century ecclesiastical politics in northern Italy. And I think there's room for critically engaging with Ambrose still much more than has been done even in the past, which has been done to a great deal. But well, he was the Bishop of Milan from 374 to 397, and he wrote 96 letters distributed in 10 books, plus some letters outside the collection. Book number 10 and the letters outside the collection have received a great deal of historiographical attention because they look at politics with the emperor and the usurpers. But the other 9 books is Ambrose dealing with his clerics and bishops around in northern Italy. Ambrose has been considered the first metropolitan bishop in the West, primarily because his letters are so asymmetrical in a word. So it's Ambrose consistently doing favors to his colleagues in northern Italy. And what I did was visualizing this with network software, and a different picture emerged. So what I did first was visualizing Ambrose's epistolary, so his connections with the other clerics and bishops in northern Italy. And this is what you have, a star-shaped structure. So Ambrose in the middle, Ambrose the most important node in this network. But once you add the numbers of letters, so the frequency of interactions, you see some interesting patterns emerging. So for instance, most of the letters were sent to people in Milan. So these bishops here, Orontianus, Irenaeus, Simplicianus, all these are clerics, in the Church of Milan. The only exception is Sabinus, to whom I will come back in a sec. And what I wanted to do was also seeing Ambrose in the context of other relationships. So I used council attendance from this period of time. There's not many sources for this period. So once you put together the letters of Ambrose with council attendance at this time, what you get is this slightly more complex picture. So many other bishops, but still Ambrose in the middle. And one of the things that network software allow you to do is to remove one node in order to see the connection of that bypass this node. So in this case, Ambrose is so dominant because he was so prolific. But what happened when Ambrose is not there? So are these bishops still connected among themselves? And what I got is this, which is Sabinus of Piacenza is actually a very central figure. And this is interesting from many aspects, but Sabinus has been absolutely ignored by historiography, but he's a central actor in this network once you start digging into his persona and his history. So he attended a number of councils already before Ambrose was there. He was sent to the east, so he contacted to the Cappadocian fathers. Then he came back to the west, and by the time Ambrose was elected bishop, Sabinus was already quite well connected in northern Italy. So he was kind of introducing Ambrose to this network, and Sabinus attended each and every single council Ambrose organized, and most of his friends also attended these councils. So to some extent, if those councils were successful, it's because Sabinus was there. So he was kind of the broker of relationships in Ambrose. So this is the end of my presentation. I'm very sorry that I think I'm over time, and that was a very quick presentation, but I hope it has at least transmitted some ideas of what we are doing in this project. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much, David. Please, attendees, do use the Q&A portal to write questions to David that then later could ask them. So please, I encourage you to write your question for David now, and at the end of the webinar, he can answer all of these questions. So thank you, David. Now we go with our second speaker. So, okay, I think that I have to, no. Okay. Thank you, David. Okay, our second speaker is Antonio. And Antonio, that you have to unmute your microphone. Okay, and Antonio, we will give a paper about approaching and use of medieval landscape via geographic story information system. So now is your turn, so whenever you want.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Thank you so much to the organizing committee for inviting me to this magnificently organized event, and for giving me the opportunity to present this small work which we conducted some years ago with Dr. Iñaki Martin Biso, who is a lecturer in medieval history in the University of Salamanca. Well, my presentation, sorry. Yeah, just an initial clarification, because just a few notes to let you know that I am not an expert in GIS. I am only a scholar with some interest in, sorry for, yeah. I am only a historian with some interest in different approaches to subjects which have been tackled from only a few techniques. And I think there are a lot of field in order to test other approaches. This is worth noting in the current context of academia, where there is a strong specialization of every single scholar in their own parcel of research, and there is also a rampant snobism allied with some really sophisticated tools like GIS and all the images in Landsat images and all the spatial databases which are available on the internet these days. The main point I would like to make in this presentation has to do with the fact that not always sophisticated is equal to helpful or even pertinent in some research topics. And this is more true in the case of the digital humanities, where one of the missing subjects sometimes is the research questions, which should be the first thing every single scholar should approach. And I'm going to try to make this point through a case study which focus on inland Spain in the tablelands of the Meseta or the highland plateau in middle Spain. And in this is the study region. This is Dr. Iñaki Martin Biso. He's an expert on rock cut tombs. These are graves which are carved into the rock, and Iñaki has been developing several research projects focusing on this phenomenon. Well, the historical context of these funerary devices is the so-called Reconquest in central Spain, and the study area is the central system where in these times were a borderland between different really small competing and emerging powers. You can see the Christian powers in the north, and then the Islamic powers in southern Iberia, in the south of the Iberian Peninsula. Throughout the early middle ages, we can see how the lands of the meseta, of the tablelands, are progressive, paulatina. There is a paulatin conquest and political administration of these regions, except some settings like the hilly and the mountainous ones, like the central system, which are pretty beyond these lowland statelets, really small polities, which are far. They are far long away from the centers of power, with the capitals, for example, in León or Toledo. And we can see the central system like a shattered zone of peasant populations which are resistant against these consolidated or statelists. This is an image of the political movements and the main factings in these days. Okay, so the problem and the subject of our research was where the people who are, for example, Fernand Brodel called the montagnards, are the peoples of the hill. The herders, they are people which are beyond at an arm's length of the state, and they follow political and moral strategies which are conflicting with the interests of the states. They are against the grain, like the very well-known title of a book by James C. Scott, or they are constantly on the move. They follow opportunistic strategies, and they also practice a segmentary way of organization, which makes really difficult, really tough for the state to take and to control and monitor these people. This is why they are really hard to track, even in the written documentation, but also in the archaeology. For example, we know almost nothing about the household archaeology or the domestic record of these peoples. They live in these mountainous settings, and here you can see some photographs of the most apparent and visible of the remnants left by these agro-pastoral groups, which are the rock dug tombs. You can see they are.
Antonio, sorry for interrupting you. I think that there is a problem. I can't see your screen. We can't see your screen.
Can't?
Yeah, can't.
Oh.
So you have to click share screen at the bottom of the screen.
So you haven't seen anything of the.
No, I think that not.
Sorry. Sorry. Yeah. Now?
We have now. We see everything now.
Wow. So.
Sorry.
Okay.
So you can. You have enough time if you want to.
Well, just this one. The image of the study zone you can see is in the middle of Spain. This was the political atmosphere in these days. It's a Portland region, and you can see how there are many PT stateless, which are focused on the lowland settings, but they are far away from this region, which is a hilly one and a peripheral one. Okay, so we have these small polities, and we have the montañas, the people who live in the hills, which are escaping the state and which are practicing a peasant lifestyle. And these are the tombs, the graves which Dr. Martin Biso had been studying for some time. And the study of these tombs is a bit problematic. There are a lot of long-held prejudice which have to do with the traditional way of thinking and making history, which is the positivist one. And there are a lot of cliche images, for example, the population of Inner Iberia or Inner Spain in this time period, the backwardness, the isolation, or even the rudeness and sophistication of these people. The most practiced way of studying these tombs and this funerary record is by the typological one. So it's making evolutionary charts with the chronotypological typos for every single time period and region. And I find, and Iñaki finds all these approaches really boring and irrelevant in terms of historical analysis. And this is why, okay, one of the strengths of these manifestations are that the rocks did not move, and this is what let us approach them from their spatial patterning. Okay, we have a lot of ethno-historical literature which suggests that these cemeteries, all cemeteries in pre-industrial societies, are really important in shaping the social life in terms of, for example, moral strategies in order to reunite in communities, claiming rights in the case of the people who are raising livestock, or forging identities, really fragmented and isolated identities, but communal identities and even elite identities among the peasant communities. These are some of the research questions that we are aiming to tackle. Why the tombs were dug there and these locations? What factors, what locative factors were important in these cultural choices? Prominency, visibility, the land use of the soils around the tombs were important in terms of the spatial patterning of these sites. Were they landmarks, as some of scholars have proposed really recently? And what can these cultural decisions tell us about the people who were making and using these tombs? What cultural rationales are behind these manifestations? Well, the aims of our project were to take a step forward and beyond the simple description of these manifestations, and to explore new avenues of inquiry and other dimensions we have not been tested so far, with a special social emphasis in our analysis. And this is why we resorted to GIS. Okay, there is no need and no time to explain what is a GIS, but these are some of the reasons why we were resorting to GIS, because we had to manage a lot of spatial information, and really from different sources, and really difficult to handle together, because we were not aiming at reconstructing anything at all. Our aim was only to test an experimental approach. It's only to a modelization, make a model of some geospatial dates, and then collate these observations through a systematic and rigorous appraisal, and to get some quantitative observations in terms of statistical significance. And we can also make some cool maps, of course. This is the study area. You can see the central system in Spain. Iñaki Martín Bisó divided the tombs into two groups, isolated graves and rural necropolises, which are the collation of several of these tombs on the same surface or a really close environment setting. You can see here which is the spatial pattern of all the villages documented in the first mentions in the textual sources in 1250. Where are the burial sites and the different classes of burial sites in the study area? An initial and intuitive visual glimpse, you can see how there is a central large cemetery, which is called La Cova, which is a concentration of over 40 tombs in a high mountain setting, and there are no cemeteries around in a buffer zone of over 5 kilometers from this area, and you can find small isolated tombs in the periphery of this center. Apparently there is something more than random locations here. We tried several statistical tests, and the funerary sites are grouped, and there are some patterns, and we can differentiate some of them. For example, we can see how the large cemetery of La Cova is in the middle of a regional polity or a regional order of the Sierra de Avila, the part where this study is focused on. And this is the site of La Cova. It's completely different to other sites, and there are several groups of tombs which apparently they have to do with the kinship organization of these people. And this is something really illuminating in terms of the social organization of these groups. It is also worth of noting that, like this, in terms of the land, the land uses of the soils surrounding these funerary sites, there are several tendencies of trends. Well, you can see here is a classical technique of study, which is called the site catchment analysis. And you can see how what we have done is to group the soils in 3 different categories. Group 1 is the most intensive source fallow agriculture with intensive crops, for example. Group B is extensive agriculture, dry farming agriculture with low fallow crops and cattle breeding. And we have the Group C soils, which are rocky soils, really thin soils, which are only appropriate for silvoforestal and forestry uses. Well, the statistical analysis of this, or the quantitative and the statistical analysis of these dates give us no clear relationship between the isolated grades and the rural disordered cemeteries and the soils around them. The Group A soils are underrepresented in all the types of sites. And the groups C and B are in keeping with their representation is far higher than the other one, and is in keeping with an interest in extensive and diversified strategies, which is also very much in line with peasant lifestyles and the exploitation of the setting. And these are only some glimpses of some line of sight analysis that we conducted from the funerary site. You can see in yellow, the yellow areas are the visibility, the zones which are visible from the large disordered cemeteries. And you can see how is the valley, is the southern part of the study region, which is most visible from these locations. In contrast, in the isolated graves, they are more focused on visibility in these small north-south valleys, which are in the northern high slope of the study area. And this is an accumulated visibility between all the sites which have been studied in this approach. And you can see how they are very much interested in the valley and in the regions which are far away from the sites. Just in order to conclude, a fine way to summarize and these monuments are like arms of the weak. It's an expression of James C. Scott. These are these rock tombs are peasant monuments with ever-changing meanings and roles we cannot glimpse at all, but which were long-lasting and held cultural esteem for several along several times. The location of these funerary sites were likely related with herding, with pastoralist groups. The more relevant location factors linked to the movements, probably to the movement of flocks and the livestock and the people across the study area. And this observation has a lot to do with the traditional way of living here, which has to do with the transterminant herders. No? And there are not differences in terms of spatial patterning between the two categories of tombs, but the organization of these tombs are pretty much in keeping with the kinship organization of these groups, so that the isolated graves are most probably related with bilateral or cognative groups, and the cemeteries are most likely related to unilineal descent groups, like patrilineages, for example. And just to finish, I would like to highlight that this is really important to resort to any research tool you have at hand, especially when it is cost effective and it has not been tested before. And it is also really enlightening to look for similar problems in other fields of research. And that's all. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Antonio. Thanks very much. That was brilliant. We will leave then time for questions. So attendees, please write your question into the Q&A portal. And thanks, Antonio. And then, okay, I'm going to, okay, thank you, Antonio. And now is the time for Evina. Okay, so. Okay, and finally, our last panelist of this first session, Evina Steinova, who will give a talk about etymologiae.ms, a virtual hand list of the pre-1000 manuscript of Isidore's Etymologiae. So, Evina, are you ready?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm here to represent the manuscript people, I think. So I will be talking about manuscripts. Let me share my screen. Yes, I hope you see it.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, okay. Okay, you see it loading, right? Ah.
Yes.
Oh, it's almost there. Great. That was strange. Okay, yeah, it loaded twice. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm going to use this 15 minutes to talk about a digital database of manuscripts I developed as a part of my project, and I call it etymologia.ms. The database is not online yet. It should be ready next year. So I hope some of you will be the users. And for now, I'll be talking about work in progress. I'm also no authority on database building. So I'm just sort of the simple user. I'm one of those people who have a project who want to build a database, and I took the way, and I've learned some things along the way. So I hope what I will be talking about will be enlightening to some of you. It will be mostly about my project and my database, but I also hope to tell you something more about manuscript databases that are out there, and maybe what can you do if you want to build one for yourself, or you're considering one. I don't know whether that's the case. So let me start by talking about what is a manuscript database. Perhaps you've noticed that in the last decade, 10, 20 years, there are more and more websites and more web-based projects which include descriptions of manuscripts and images of manuscripts. No, a manuscript database, I would say, is not every single of them. I would say these are just the kind of websites or web projects which can be compared to a printed catalog or a hand list of manuscripts. They are thus manuscript oriented towards manuscript as an object and towards providing a description about that manuscript. I'm not including here digitization projects, because I think those are quite different in the sense that they provide mostly tool or platform for viewing digital images. And it's quite different from a manuscript database. As you will see the examples, there is not a project which actually digitizes manuscripts, but either relies on what is digitized or do not provide any images. So it's more like a catalog or even a smaller kind of entity. Usually they are project-based, which means they're quite humbler than, say, digitization projects, which tend to be larger and kind of have larger budgets as well. And usually a thematic as far as the project is oriented. And this means we usually have manuscript databases that are genre oriented or oriented towards a specific author or text, or maybe towards a specific manuscript feature. They're small in scale usually. They mostly constitute hundreds of manuscripts or thousands of manuscripts at most, and they're quite not sophisticated in complexity. Before this talk, I tried to put together sort of a small list in my head about what kind of manuscript databases I know or use already. And here are some that I could think of. I'm pretty sure there are not all that are there, but these are the ones that I know and I use. And maybe you recognize some of them. They run in scale from several hundred manuscripts. I think Transtextual Networks are about 300 manuscripts, Marginal Scholarship around 300 manuscripts, to larger sets of, I think Jordanus is the largest with about 14,000 manuscripts described. and also different sophistication. Some of them are more static, some of them are more dynamic, some of them are author focused, as in case of Ptolemaios here, or genre focused as in case of the Manuscript America. Some of them are more about a specific type of feature, for example, Old High German glosses or musical notation in manuscripts. And my project also builds a database that will fit very much into this kind of landscape. It's also quite small, several hundred manuscripts. And the main kind of description is that these are manuscripts that contain the etymology of Isidore of Seville, so the most important Latin medieval encyclopedia that was there. So let me tell you a bit about what is inside the database, or what will be there once it's online. At the moment, it's about 400, almost 450 manuscripts predating mid-11th century that can transmit this text. It's not only manuscripts strictly of the etymologies, that's only 84 manuscripts. They're not more than that, but there are many other kinds of manuscripts that contain similar or same material, but different kinds. There are some epitomes, there are fragments as well. There are even manuscripts that contain material from Isidore as marginalia, which are quite interesting. I'm doing this as a part of my project. The project is called Innovating Knowledge. It's a 3-year postdoctoral project that is running since February 2018 at Huygens Institute in Amsterdam. It should be officially ending in April 2021. And the focus of the project is the fusion of innovations and intellectual networks in the early Middle Ages. And to study these intellectual networks, I decided to focus on this encyclopedia, the Etymologia, because I've noticed that the early medieval manuscripts often contain various additions and novel features which are not original to Isidore of Seville, and that they actually not only that they contain these kind of innovations, but actually these innovations tend to be shared and tend to be exchanged, and you can follow their flow to actually say something about how intellectual centers exchange new trends and new ideas. And I'm trying to do it with the hope of understanding a slightly bit better that interesting phenomenon known as the Carolingian Renaissance, how these centers actually interacted and how this may have contributed to that phenomenon. I'm using both traditional philological approach, but also network analysis, you perhaps see here. And the database is an integral part of the research because it sort of creates the base for sort of anchoring all these interesting innovations and linking the manuscripts together. The database is based, in this case, I started from a printed hand list. So there's sort of a printed resource at the back end. And that is this very useful hand list produced by Gustav Eduard Anspach. He was a German philologist who produced notes on all known manuscripts containing the etymology of Isidore of Seville. He did it in the early 20th century. This is the first sort of source that I used to feed my database to be in terms of data. But of course, I had to use many other resources because the original hand list is not entirely complete. There are all kinds of mistakes, errors, and I was able to actually benefit from all kinds of other digital projects which are already there, including from manuscript digitization projects. I can tell you, for example, DigiVatlib, if you know that, the digitized manuscripts of Vatican Library, which do not have descriptions, you can still find unidentified manuscripts there because there are no descriptions for them. And of course, I should say part of the effort is also to do in situ research. About 1/3 of those roughly 450 manuscripts is not digitized, and those are manuscripts I plan still to see in person, at least partially. I'm a bit prevented by coronavirus, but I still hope to go to places to see some of the manuscripts and include information and descriptions into my database. The resulting product will look something like this for those who are interested. This is, by the way, just an example for now. I still have to develop how the sort of the record card for each manuscript will look. It will be something like this. There will be some information about the physical properties of the manuscript, its date of origin, place of origin, so the kind of thing you find in the catalog. This is the part which contains information about the presence of material from the etymologia, which chapters appear and where in the manuscript, what additional content is there in the manuscript, if there is additional content. In the second part of the record, more interesting for me parts, about the relationship between a manuscript and any other manuscript inside the database or outside of it, and some notes on the presence of specific innovations which are relevant to the project. When I decided to develop this database, I had a very clear idea that I do not want to just digitally replicate the Anspach's hand list, sort of create sort of a digital surrogate for it. and make something which will be primarily browsable like a book. I mean, maybe some sort of index at the back, but mostly a book that needs to be sort of leafed through. But instead, I wanted to create a database. And I think that's also the important difference between a hand list and a database. It is not oriented towards browsing or going through or reading through, but rather it is built around some sort of search functionality or a search query functionality, filtering functionality. So the main point is to get to the information not as text, but as data, and to work with them as data. This, of course, was a very costly decision. It's actually quite costly to build a database rather than, say, a hand list or something simpler. And in my case, I had to rely on dedicated developers. I'm very lucky because my institute has a digital infrastructure department. And I have a group of programmers who are actually cooperating with me on building this thing and making it work. And this also means it's not a one-person project, but actually I really rely on these technical specialists. We have to coordinate a lot, we have to plan a lot. It takes a lot extra energy than if it was just a simple research project. So in terms of that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about walk you through how it works and what else will still happen with the database, how did I go about building it? There are sort of 3 different layers inside it. The first layer is what I provide as a researcher, that's my data. And the first step was, of course, data collection, formatting, and cleaning. The cleaning is ongoing, that's the endless job you will have. And that was a choice of what kind of tool will I use for collecting my data. I chose Excel, that's quite easy, and it's actually simple and good. That's only the data, so that's what the content, what you saw, the record view, that's fed entirely through the Excel sheet. But there must be also a structure, a real database structure behind it, a proper relational database. It has to be built by a programmer. And my main programmer was Meindert Cruz from our institute. And he built this Postgres database as a sort of back end. So this is at the back, this is the engine that powers everything you will want to see, hopefully online. This database you can't access as a user unless you know programming languages. You can do so-called Sparkle queries, which I don't know, and probably many of you will not do. So there is also a need for a proper user interface, and that was built by another dedicated developer, Rob Zeeman, who did it in JavaScript, if you wonder. And this is how it looks. And I think, I don't think I can zoom in, unfortunately. Yeah, well, yeah, I can share slides afterwards if you want to look deeply into it. There's a very strong search facets here and search options here. These are the results by clicking at each of them, and this is probably very familiar to you. You can get to the record view. This is not yet the complete thing. This is just sort of a mock-up, just sort of an example, because there will be a few other features which I hope are very interesting. Above all, I plan to have a download button here because I believe very strongly in data export from databases. And so it should be possible for you as users, potential users, to export data in 1 or 2 different formats to reuse for your own projects and for your research. I will see, my big plan is maybe to provide several different formats, including one that will be sort of an ebook. So also have sort of a print-like publication, sort of wrapped in, maybe sort of a hand list, sort of Ansbach tool, but you can print if you really want or read on your reader as you would a book. There should be also, which you haven't seen, there will be a IIIF viewer. So you should be able to see images of the manuscript directly from the database. And there should be some cool visualization tools involved as well. For example, a map and maybe a few others. So there should be also a map view. So I think I should be already concluding. So I would like to just sort of reflect a bit on pros and cons of building a digital database, and especially in contrast to creating other kinds of output from your project and focusing on printed publication or printing a presentation of data that are generated in a project. There are, of course, lots of cool things about having a database, and above all, the best thing about it is what makes it different from sort of a hand list or a printed hand list is that it's interactive and dynamic. It means that the people who engage with your data are simply users. They just not only read or browse, but they use and work with your data. If you prepare it well, if you think ahead, you should be thinking, I think everybody should have a data export option involved, because it means that the data can be easily extracted and reused. And that's something which is very crucial, which if you have a publication, think Bishop's Catalog of 9th century manuscripts, that's an amazing publication, but it's actually really frustrating that you can't get the data out of it very easily. It should be done with a database. Another great thing is you can integrate images. These days, especially, it's quite easy because of IIIF standards. So you should be able to integrate images directly into your database, which is something which is always difficulty with a printed publication. A huge advantage. Generally, it's a huge advantage that you can link out from your database to many other things, digital things which exist in the ecosystem of internet, or you can actually link very efficiently even within a database of this kind. And you may be able to include all kinds of cool tools and features that of course cannot work with a print. For example, think of maps and all kinds of mapping tools and all kinds of statistical tools. And last but not least, the thing with books is that they maybe once the moment they are printed, they are static, they no longer change. But a good digital database, again, if you think about it, if you plan for it, you should be able to sort of make it dynamic in the sense that you can add data and correct data and improve it, and also keep track of all the versions and sort of publish the different versions with also explaining what has changed and how it changed, which is really nice to have such a dynamic project. And now some disadvantages as well, because digital databases are not better, as I should say it, than printed publications. They're just different beasts. And you should know that they are not a substitute or replacement of a printed, say, handlist or catalog. They just have some sort of, they come with certain disadvantages or certain problems which are sort of bundled in. And I think these days, the worst problem with associated with digital projects in general is maintenance. Once you plan a digital project, you must think about what will happen to it after your project ends, once your funding runs out. Who is going to make sure that the data stays online, that the project continue to live? And when I was looking for those examples I showed earlier, in fact, I realized 5 or 6 projects I knew about and was very enthusiastic about actually died in the meantime. So they're no longer there, and the data is presumably gone forever, which is or somewhere where you can no longer reach it. So this is something you need to think about. When you have a printed book, books do not vanish once your funding vanishes. They stay on the bookshelf. So this is really important. Hand in hand with that, it's really great to say that the great thing about databases and digital projects in general is that you can continue to curate the data and improve them as they age. But this is something you also need to think ahead. Otherwise, your data is going to be obsolete very quickly. Maybe it depends really like what kind of data, what kind of format you use. For example, this can be a huge problem after 5, 10, 50, 20 years, even if you maintain the data somehow. You may also think that once you put things online out there, everybody has access to the data, and the data is more reachable than if you publish traditionally in press. But unfortunately, it's not exactly like that. You may actually be putting your data out there, but it's not necessarily the case that people will be finding it or finding it easily, or that they will be connected, your data will be well connected with many other things. So you can maybe actually putting data there and it will get more lost than if it was printed. It may be also the case that you are not reaching certain kind of audiences. There are always audiences which are more reachable by print. So you have to always think about it, what kind of audiences I have in mind, and will they actually be able to use and access my data if I put it out there in a specific format? Maybe your database is going to be really complex to use and therefore difficult to actually access. And another problem that the current manuscript databases have to some extent, I'm not the expert, so this is my kind of layman's or laywoman's impression, is that many of them are built from scratch, or very often this is the case. They are very dissimilar from each other, and therefore they are not interoperable. They do not share data very easily, and they exist in sort of their own bubbles, and there are many of them, and each of them has been developed from scratch. So that's lots of energy, and also it's very difficult to find the connection between them. This was, I think, this was a problem with digitization, early digitization efforts as well. That's why we have standards like IIIF. And I think maybe there are already standards in place for digital databases as well, or we need them because we are getting to the point where we have many small databases which could be nicely merged together, and that's not happening. And also, again, if you do not think about data export, and I'm a very big advocate of data export always included somehow, your data may be simply inaccessible. It's very great to have things interactive and on screen, but sometimes it's really good to have it out there offline as well, and to have access to it. And of course, a huge disadvantage is that often when you have a digital project, there is no print. And print is actually really good. It's not worse, and it should be there. And again, I advocate for sort of a double track to have both a digital component and do not forget about print or print-like medium as well. I will end here. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you have some questions.
Lovely. Thank you, Evina, for your interesting paper. I would like to encourage people to ask all the questions that you have in the Q&A that you have at the bottom of the screen. So please ask every comment, question that you have, as well as the speaker. If you have a question each other, you can ask as well. If you can unmute your microphone so we can start our comments. So now it's time for the questions. Okay, so we have a few questions coming in the Q&A portal. We have one question of Jose Alexandre Sousa that is from Jose Alexandre for David. That is, what is the software he used to build the relationship between all that people? And I see that David is answered, but if you can to say anything more about that, David?
Yes, so there are many different software available. I think purists would say that Gephi is actually quite simple. So a friend of mine and the person that knows more about networks than, I don't know, anyone probably, he knows a lot. He's the person that started implementing networks in Byzantine history, and he's Johannes Preiser Capella. He never uses Gephi because he thinks it's very simple. And but for me, because the amount of data I'm using is very limited, Gephi is more than enough, because the only thing I want to see is I don't want to use this software as a quantitative tool. I just want to see how these networks look like, who is the person there, if I can model these networks a bit, play around and see how it changes. And if that helps me to understand, go back to the sources and understand them differently and read the sources differently, then it's fine. But I'm not going to base my analysis on quantitative data, because it wouldn't be representative. So I think it really depends on the nature of the data you're dealing with. If, as me, you are working with limited information, which is probably the case in early medieval and in the West, then Gephi is more than enough, and it's really easy to use. There are 1,000 tutorials on YouTube that you can watch, and it's very, very easy to use. So that would be my answer.
Okay, thank you, David. So whereas people are thinking about their questions, I have a comment for Evina. I think that it's very important what you say at the end of the speech, that is very important to think, as you know, databases are disseminate these days. We have the database of about everything, but the principal problem is the funding. That's because when the funding ends, many times the database ends as well. So this is a big problem, because we have in internet a lot of databases that are ending and that cost a lot of money. So I would like I think that your project is very interesting to have all of these manuscripts in this database. But I would like to ask you if you have a solution that could be applied to this problem, to the end of funding. What can we do with that? What can we do for database to survive when funding is ending? Thank you, Vina.
Right, this is a really important question, and there are several different answers to it. One of them is, of course, to have different policy and general different mindset about what needs to be done about this. For example, to have sort of funding not only for projects and not only for building databases, but also for maintenance, which is not the case right now, right? Or not directly. You cannot apply for either maintaining or even extending or expanding. That may be quite difficult to ask, like, I want to get extra money to make this database better or something. I think it depends a lot on the policies of institutions you are cooperating with, because your data is sitting on somebody's server and the server belongs to somebody. And at least, for example, in my institute, there is a policy that before we start on project, they stipulate how long is the data going to be maintained, who is going to maintain it. And this is something you, in theory, should be able to sort before you start or as you are starting. And again, understand that this may be something difficult for researchers, especially if they are not very familiar with how particular institutions work, or what is the data management strategy at all, or whether 5 years or 10 years or 20 years are good. But another thing, which is a completely different way of looking at it, is that you need to make your data available, because even if the database dies, and the data is there, and even, for example, the script for making it from the scratch again, then that you can always reconstruct it. Especially if the data is there, that's the important thing. And that is something that doesn't die with a project. So as long as you take care of it and think ahead that, right, my project ends in 5 years or 3 years, the data must be published ideally somewhere and make available so other people can work with it irrespectively of whether the database works or not. That's like a laywoman's perspective, because I think everybody would tell you something similar. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that you are thinking in the future of this database, not only in creating it, but also in the future of that. So thank you for the answer. Now I have now some question for Evina as well. So Evina, don't also put your video. It's a question for Evina from Sita Sikel. She said, with project, do you plan to map and visualize relationship between related manuscripts and transmission communities as well? So are you registering all co-transmitted texts of Etymologiae?
In short, the answer is yes, that was the plan of the project, to actually sort of map and visualize the relationships, especially relationships which are not sort of philological, but more like a different kind that maybe show different sort of links. Yes, and I'm definitely registering all co-transmitted texts of the Etymologiae, and that's part of what is desirable to be mapped. And in the longer answer is, it's of course a bit too difficult for a 3-year single-person project. So I have lots of data, but I was planning to publish it in the database, but it's not going to happen, I'm afraid. But the data is there, and at least some projects are on the way. So there will be, for example, a good visualization and mapping of a transmission of glosses and annotations, which I think is good for a start.
This is related as well with the question that Ainhoa Castro have for you. That is, could you spoil us with some of the exciting news discoveries you've made already?
Oh, okay. I can already tell you. I could tell you so many things, but it's like for 30 minutes, a different talk. The most interesting for me was the discovery. So I was looking for what I would call reductions. So medieval reductions. So the cases when my medieval people actually decided to create a new text, sort of a new text version to circulate and maybe actually push to other centers. And I so far located five different reductions, which are super interesting because none of them is actually Carolingian, as in coming from the Carolingian area, but there is a Spanish one, there's 1 or 2 Italian ones and 2 German ones, which is really great. And there will be an amazing article coming out about the German ones because they're from St. Gallen and they're absolutely amazing. So I love St. Gallen monks because they were super cool and in producing these things. So that's one of the great findings. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Evina. Now we have a question for Antonio from Daniel Justo, who said, is there an efficient way to check the place from where tombs were visible using GNAs? Because it seems to me a good way to complete the information given from the usage analysis, and I used to do it manually, creating viva points in a given area. But maybe you know other better ways. So it's a good question, Antonio, when you want.
Well, a better way is to go to the...
I can't hear you, Antonio. Yeah. Now.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much for the question. The answer is really simple. You can go to the field and then put there and see what you can see from this point. But the potency and the important thing of the EIS is that you can make a model of everything, and then you can recreate these circumstances and situations. So it's not a reconstruction of anything, because the paleolandscapes do not exist anymore. So the only thing we can do is to recreate these circumstances. And in this case, the more efficient way to do so is using EIS. So we are not aiming at a factual experiment. It's only a model of the geographical setting.
I have another question, Antonio, for you. Then I continue with the next questions. That is related with the next session, with digital teaching. What do you think that the geographical information system is not teaching at the university level, if it is so important to apply them in our research? What do you think that is not teaching in this in the higher level, in the higher?
Well, in the international milieu, for example, the GIS, the heyday of the GIS were the 90s, and they have been developing courses and classes for addressing this necessity. But right now there are several in Spain. For example, there are several universities which are developing specific courses for GIS related to history or archaeology. So there are, at least in Spain right now, there are five universities which has in the curricula, in their curricula, they have specific studies on this subject. Yeah.
This is interesting because we need all this knowledge. So thank you, Antonio. And now we have a question. We have, I think that 5 minutes more of discussion. So we have a question for David from Susana Cernakova. Susana said, I have a brief experience with Open Atlas, and I encountered an issue with updates made to the software design. But the developers made it practically unusable for my post. Is this something you can avoid when working on a long-term project?
Yes. So, well, in theory, you should be able to change the database and tailor it to your needs yourself. But I agree that it's not as evident as it should be. But once you're working with them, and also because we've been working for a long time, yeah, so they are taking care of kind of doing everything that we need. Even I think the contract is ending just before the end of our project, so we will have that support almost until the end. But even after, because we've been working on a very close relationship, even after that time, we will still have, for small changes, we'll still have the support. And kind of linking with the previous question about where all these digital projects are going to be hosted. This is going to be hosted at the Austrian Academy of Sciences. They are going to provide the long-term maintenance and curate the data and everything. So this is why also they're interested on updating the software and keeping it, kind of making it working for our project even in the long run.
Thanks, David. And we have time for another last question that is for Evina from Thorsten Esteban, and it says, did you learn about the reduction from metadata more than from philological examination? Quite interesting question.
It's a very nice question. It depends on which reduction. Some of them were more visible from the metadata. Some of them were actually quite visible from the metadata. Others, I had to do the philological examination. It was like 3-2. So both works. And there were other things which you could see from the metadata very nicely, and from basically the bigger sort of look, the zoom out that is allowed by a big set corpus of data.
Okay, thank you. So so I am afraid, but it's more or less the end of our time. It's almost 6:30, which means I must close this first session. So thank you very much to all the speakers and attendees for joining it. So now we will have a short break of about 30 minutes for coffee, tea, or whatever you want. I see you later to our second session, that is digital teaching. Remember that you must join it with the other link that I sent you to the email, with the link of the second session. And thank you very much, at all. Thank you. Bye. See you in the second session.